Hi. If you're a Ravens fan, I'm extremely sorry. I'm about to make you relive some of the worst memories of your entire sports fan life. The Ravens have been a pretty successful team since their addition to the league in 1996, but are very well known for something else as well, which is seemingly finding the worst ways possible to lose. My name's Clayton, and today we're going to be making a tier list of the most agonizing moments in Baltimore Ravens history. Just a couple things before we start. I'm only 22, so I do not directly remember any Ravens incidents that took place before 2008, the year that the Ravens hired John Harbaugh and drafted Joe Flacco. There's only 2 incidents on this list pre-2008, and if there are any more I wasn't around to see that any old heads want to tell me about in the comment section, please do. This list is also my personal feelings and opinions about the respective games and incidents, so you may not agree with the rankings, and that's perfectly fine. My personal circumstances and where I was in life affected some of these rankings, but I try to be pretty agreeable to all other Ravens fans in general. If you disagree with the list, write me about what you'd change. Descriptions about the events will get more detailed as the list goes along, so stick around to the end. I promise you it gets really juicy. Let's get right into it. So 3 of these first 4 entries on my list are from the 2022 season, the first of which is the Bills choke job. And no, it's probably not the one that most people think of when you mention the Ravens handing the Bills a win on a silver platter, but one that should be discussed anyways. In week 4, the Bills came to M&T Bank Stadium, and the game started really ugly for them. In the first quarter, Josh Allen threw an interception on the 4th play of the game, and then Devin Singletary fumbled the ball straight to the Ravens, who took a pretty commanding 20-3 lead heading into halftime. That would, however, be the last time the Ravens would score, as they suffered from a pretty generational meltdown, what else is new, that resulted in 0 points and 2 Lamar Jackson interceptions in the 4th quarter. They gave the Bills the opportunity to essentially snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, and they did just that. They scored on 3 of their 4 second-half possessions, beating the Ravens 23-20. This loss was the second worst blown lead the Ravens had suffered since their inaugural 1996 season, and one that's still frustrating to watch to this day. I'm gonna go ahead and start off this list by putting this one in the C tier, and we're going to be going from the bottom of the C tier all the way up to S+. Next up, we're going to something less agonizingly painful and more what could have been. If you weren't already aware, the 2007 Patriots are pretty widely regarded as the greatest team in NFL history. They finished the regular season undefeated. Tom Brady and Randy Moss just went completely nuclear on offense, and Bill Belichick's defense was absolutely punishing. They ended up coming into Baltimore on December 3rd as 18.5-point favorites over the Ravens. The game was back and forth through the 4th quarter as the Ravens defense, led by Ed Reed and Ray Lewis, held MVP Tom Brady to by far his lowest passer rating this season and under 50% of his passes completed, but unfortunately it was not enough. Down 3 with 8 seconds left on the clock, quarterback Kyle Bowler attempted to throw a Hail Mary as time expired. Somehow, the ball was actually caught by Mark Clayton, but Clayton went down just 2 yards shy of the end zone, leaving Ravens fans daydreaming of being the only team to upset the greatest NFL team ever. This one is also going to go in the C tier, right above that last one. Next up, in 2022, the Lamar Jackson-led Ravens played the Dolphins at home in Baltimore. By halftime, it kind of just looked like the game would be a complete blowout, and the Ravens were up 28-7. However, the Ravens defense completely collapsed in the second half, where have I heard that one before, allowing Tua Tagovailoa to throw 5 touchdowns in just 2 quarters. With just 14 seconds left in the game, Tua delivered the knife into the hearts of all Ravens fans with a game-sealing touchdown to Jalen Waddle. The final score was 42-38. 440 total yards and 4 touchdowns from Lamar Jackson wasn't enough for the Ravens to hold on. It was a pretty generational collapse and the largest blown lead in Baltimore Ravens history. However, at the end of the day, this was just another regular season game, and Lamar would go on to completely shred the Dolphins the next couple times they met. So this one was extremely upsetting, but it doesn't hold as much weight as the others above it on this list to me. This one is also going to go in the C tier. Once again, we're staying in the 2022 season. Lamar Jackson was injured in week 13 of the 2022 season, and the Ravens went on to suffer a few very nasty low-scoring losses with backup quarterback and Ravens legend Tyler Huntley at the helm. Ravens kind of limped into the playoff without Lamar and were pretty much expected to be completely shredded by the red-hot Bengals, who were fresh off of a Super Bowl appearance in the first round of the playoffs. However, somehow, Huntley and the Ravens managed to keep the game close until the fourth quarter, and it genuinely seemed like an unbelievable upset could be coming. Down 7 at the Bengals' 1-yard line, Tyler Huntley jumped over a pile of people attempting to get into the end zone, but unfortunately, the ball was punched out of Huntley's hands and taken back the other way by Bengals defensive end Sam Hubbard for a 98-yard touchdown. The Bengals held on to the lead and ended up winning the game. This one isn't as bad as some others for me, mostly due to the fact that expectations were extremely low since the Ravens were without their starting quarterback, and the Bengals were 10-point favorites heading into the game. While the fumble was pretty upsetting, the Ravens keeping up with a healthy Bengals team even without Lamar Jackson made it seem like the future was very hopeful for them. Okay, so editor's note, I retroactively decided that this game was more upsetting than I gave it credit for after rewatching the entire game front to back, but I already committed to it, so I'm gonna leave it where I ranked it in the video. Just know I wanted it to be higher. I also forgot to mention that James Prochet almost caught the game-winning Hail Mary attempt. Like, he was literally inches away from that. I don't know how I forgot to write about that. Anyways, this one is going to be our first entry into the B tier. Many Ravens fans over the age of about 25 or so will probably tell you that they think the 2006 Ravens were the best team that the Ravens have ever had. And although I would disagree, it's not even a crazy claim to make. The 06 Ravens went 13-3, which at the time was the best record in franchise history, and had added former NFL MVP quarterback Steve McNair in the offseason. For the first time ever, the Ravens had a star quarterback, albeit at the end of his prime, to pair with the NFL's best defense that was led by Hall of Famers Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, and Terrell Suggs, who I will mention several more times in this video. But it didn't take long in the postseason for the Ravens' dreams of another Super Bowl to be crushed. In the first round of the playoffs, the Ravens met their absolute bitter rival, Peyton Manning-led Colts. This game was a defensive slugfest where the scoring consisted of exclusively field goals. Peyton Manning was held completely in check by the Ravens defense, being picked off not once but twice by Ed Reed, who also broke up 4 passes, and with Ray Lewis seemingly everywhere on the field, recording 16 tackles. The performance was quite possibly Manning's worst playoff game ever, but it was not enough for the Ravens to win. Baltimore's offense was non-existent, committing 4 turnovers through the game. The most costly turnover was unfortunately an interception thrown by Steve McNair with 10 minutes left in the game straight into a Colts defender's hands. The Ravens would only record 2 offensive yards for the remainder of the game, and the legendary performance by the Ravens defense would be forgotten by history as the Colts would go on to win the Super Bowl. This one is also going to go in the B tier. Between the Ravens' win in Super Bowl 47 and the drafting of Lamar Jackson, the Ravens were in a bit of a dark age where they only made the playoffs in 1 year, that year being 2014. The Ravens traveled to Pittsburgh in the wild card round and upset the heavily favored Steelers during the start of the Killer Bees era, and headed to Foxborough to face the Patriots in the divisional round. At this point, the Ravens and Patriots were pretty bitter playoff rivals and one of the most underrated rivalries of this century. All of their playoff games were awesome. You should go watch them if you haven't. The game started well as the Ravens went up 14-0. Shout out to Steve Smith Sr., by the way, he was 35 here. The Patriots rallied back though, tying it at 14 just before the half. The Ravens went up 14 points for the second time in the game, making it 28-14, but of course the Patriots responded back to not only tie it up, but take the lead midway through the fourth quarter. With the game on the line, the Ravens converted a pretty clutch 4th down. However, just 2 plays later, Flacco threw a deep shot with just a minute 40 left on the clock, was intercepted, and broke his streak of 16 straight playoff touchdowns without a pick, which is an NFL record that still stands to this day. Loss was a very tough pill to swallow, and the Ravens would go another 6 years before they won their next playoff game. I'm going to go ahead and put this one in the B tier. Fast forward 6 years later, and now here we are. The Ravens won a playoff game. Yay! However, the joy would not last for too long, as you will come to learn with the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens headed to Buffalo in Lamar Jackson's 4th playoff start in what would ultimately be a punt fest until midway through the 3rd quarter when Josh Allen threw a touchdown to Stephon Diggs to go up 10-3 on the Ravens. Up to this point, the Ravens' offense had been genuinely pathetic and unable to do basically anything, and notorious woman respecter Justin Tucker had missed 2 field goals, which was super uncharacteristic since Tucker was the best kicker in the NFL at the time. By the time the touchdown had happened, I remember feeling completely hopeless despite their lead only being 1 score. That's how bad the offense was this day. I will never forgive Greg Roman for what he did. Anyway, the next drive, the Ravens burned 8 minutes of clock and ran 15 plays, slowly working their way down the field, and it seemed as though they could score. They could not, however, as Lamar Jackson was intercepted in the end zone by Teron Johnson, who returned it 101 yards for a touchdown, effectively ending the Ravens' playoff run. The Ravens didn't score for the remainder of the game, with the final score being 17-3. Hopefully the Bills would at least go on to make the Super Bowl, right? This one is going to be our final addition to the B tier. Say the name Tyler Boyd around any longtime Ravens fan and they'll get a chill up their spine. Why, you may ask? Well, in week 17 of the 2017 NFL season, the Ravens played the Bengals. The Pittsburgh Steelers had already clinched the AFC North title, but the Ravens were trying to get the final wild card spot in the playoffs, and they had it right in their hands. If they won against the Bengals, they were in the playoffs. If they didn't, the Buffalo Bills would take the final spot. The game was pretty crazy as there were 2 points. The Ravens were down by 14, including right after halftime when the score was 24-10. The Ravens ended up coming back though with 3 consecutive scoring drives to take a 27-24 lead. All the Ravens defense had to do was not allow a touchdown with just over 2.5 minutes left on the game clock after a beautiful punt pinned them at their own 10-yard line. It seemed that the Ravens were playoff bound after the Bengals were held to a 4th and 12 with just 44 seconds on the clock. All the Ravens needed was 1 stop. Let me repeat, it was 4th and 12, and all the Ravens needed was 1 stop. What happened next will live on in infamy among Ravens fans forever.
Trying to end it here. 4th down. Dalton steps up. Dalton throws. It's complete. Caught by Boyd. Tyler Boyd. Touchdown. Remarkable.
Andy Dalton hit Tyler Boyd with a beautiful pass in poor coverage that ended up going for a 49-yard touchdown, ending the Ravens season and knocking them out of the playoffs. After missing the playoffs for a 3rd year straight, Coach John Harbaugh was on the hot seat for the first time in his tenure with the team. This loss for the Ravens also led to the Buffalo Bills ending their 17-year playoff drought to play one of the worst playoff games ever and caused a chain of events that led to the Bills drafting Josh Allen. This one is quite easily our first entry into the A tier. Remember that Bills choke job from earlier? Well, there's a worse one, and it just happened. Heading into the 2025 NFL season, the Baltimore Ravens were the odds-on favorites to win the Super Bowl, even favored over the reigning champion Philadelphia Eagles. And at the time, the hype seemed very warranted. The Ravens had signed Packers cornerback and Lamar Jackson's former college teammate, Jair Alexander, to a very team-friendly deal. Jair was viewed as one of the top corners in the NFL at the time, and many believed the Ravens secondary would be completely unstoppable. The team also picked up veteran wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins, a much-needed 50-50 threat to improve their offense. The Buffalo Bills hosted the Ravens on the first Sunday night football game of the season, with the Ravens out for blood and seeking revenge after their crushing loss to Buffalo in 2024, which I'll talk about later, unfortunately. I won't go into full detail about the first half of the game, but it was a great one, if you aren't a Ravens fan, and you should go watch the highlights. The Ravens had a monster game with Derrick Henry running for 169 yards and 2 touchdowns, Lamar Jackson scoring 3 touchdowns, and Zay Flowers catching 143 yards and a touchdown himself. After a 46-yard run from Derrick Henry, the Ravens took a 40-25 lead in the fourth quarter, and the Bills punted as Buffalo fans booed and began to leave the stadium, believing a win to be completely out of reach. However, the Bills did score a touchdown a few minutes later, bringing the score to 40-32. Then, disaster hit. The Ravens had a 99.1% chance to win the game with 3 minutes left on the clock before Derrick Henry, who had only fumbled 1 time the previous season, had the ball punched out of his hands by Ed Oliver. The Bills scored almost immediately but failed the 2-point conversion, leaving it a 2-point game. Unfortunately, the Ravens did literally nothing on the next drive, punting the ball back to the Bills, who marched down the field and kicked the game-winning field goal as time expired. Another year, another generational collapse while the entire world watched, and a humiliating defeat for the Ravens, who had hoped to make up for their playoff loss to the Bills. There's a lot more I could say about this game and this season in general, and I bet you can tell that I'm still a little pressed about it. So to save your time, I'll keep that for another video. This one is another easy A tier. So as it turns out, the Ravens are actually all too familiar with week 1 disasters. And sorry, you're gonna notice I'm gonna get a little bit more pressed the further we get into this list. This is where it's really starting to get juicy. The first game of the entire 2024 NFL season was a huge one, a rematch of the 2023 AFC Championship game, Ravens versus Chiefs, with the Ravens looking to avenge their lost season and the Chiefs wanting to prove their win over the Ravens the previous year was not a fluke. The Ravens headed to one of the harshest environments for visiting teams in the entire league and the loudest field of all, Arrowhead Stadium. So I mentioned earlier personal bias may affect some of these rankings, and this is where that shows up a little bit. From 2021 to 2025, I lived in Kansas City, Missouri, as a very vocal Ravens fan. I watched the Chiefs win championship after championship as the Ravens heartbreakingly collapsed each year. This game took place on my birthday. I hosted a watch party with a bunch of people to celebrate my birthday, but unfortunately, living in Kansas City, I was the only Ravens fan in attendance. I was surrounded by Chiefs merch, but was excited for the game nonetheless because I wanted to finally end all of the Chiefs fans I knew taunting me over the Ravens. Anyways, the game started off well with Derrick Henry scoring on his first drive as a Raven, which was awesome, and the score at 7-7 after 1 quarter. After a huge strip sack by Chris Jones, though, the Ravens lost some momentum with the score sitting at 13-10 at halftime after the woman respecter kicked 2 field goals, 1 missed and 1 successful. Fast forward to the fourth quarter, and Lamar Jackson threw an absolutely unbelievable touchdown to Isaiah Likely, followed by a crazy Mahomes touchdown to rookie Xavier Worthy and a Justin Tucker field goal. The score sat at 27-20 Chiefs. The Chiefs punted the ball to the Ravens with just 1 minute and 50 seconds left. Lamar Jackson methodically drove down the field, but the Ravens were left with almost no time at all. An incomplete pass to Isaiah Likely and a miscommunicated route with Zay Flowers later, the Ravens had 5 seconds and only 1 play to try to take the game to overtime, and it seemed that their prayers were answered. Lamar scrambled, avoiding pressure, and threw an absolute dart to Isaiah Likely for the touchdown. John Harbaugh signaled to go for 2 to win the game right then and there. At this point, I was screaming with joy and saying fuck you to one of my Chiefs fan friends who said the Ravens wouldn't possibly score because Lamar Jackson couldn't be clutch. However, when I and every Ravens fan in the world turned to look back at the screen, we were horrified. The play had been overturned. Isaiah Likely's foot was out of bounds by a fraction of an inch, by half a toe. I've never seen anything like this before. On the broadcast, while they were talking about this, they had to zoom in on Isaiah Likely's foot from like 6 different angles, and they had to put it on like 10 times zoom. It was ridiculous. But anyways, it was enough. The score was called back and the game ended then and there, with the Chiefs once again breaking Baltimore's hearts, and not to mention ruining my birthday. Thanks, guys. This one is another easy A. Ravens versus Steelers is one of the most intense, physical, and historic rivalries in the entire history of the NFL. Many former players and NFL legends like Rob Gronkowski have even called it the best in all of football. So heading into week 18 of the 2025 season, the stakes were high. It was a winner-takes-all battle for the AFC North Championship, bragging rights, and a spot in the playoffs. The Ravens began the season 1-5 with Lamar Jackson missing 3 of those games with injury, while the Steelers started 5-1. Somehow, someway, the Ravens clawed their way back into the mix for the playoffs and were 1 game away from turning what could have ended up as the worst season in franchise history into a winning season and a playoff berth in the most wide open AFC playoff picture this century. The Ravens came into Acrisure Stadium and took an early lead after a 47-yard Derrick Henry run on the first play of the game, followed by a 38-yard Lamar Jackson to Tez Walker touchdown on 4th down. After half, though, the Steelers batted a Lamar pass down into TJ Watt's hands and capitalized, turning the game around to 13-10. With 8 minutes left in the 4th quarter, Jackson narrowly avoided a sack, as only he does, then threw a beautiful 50-yard touchdown to Zay Flowers in one of the plays of the year. Vibes were high, but unfortunately, this Ravens defense was just terrible under coordinator Zach Orr. They immediately allowed another touchdown. Well, for Lamar Jackson, the moment wasn't too big, and he immediately scored again on another nuke to Zay Flowers for 64 yards with just over 2 minutes left, which should have sealed the game against an extremely weak Steelers offense. Guess what, though? The defense allowed another touchdown from old man Aaron Rodgers, leaving the Ravens down 2 with under 1 minute left on the game clock. For the 3rd straight drive, Lamar Jackson put the Ravens in position to win the game and kneeled the ball to attempt the game-winning kick. Tyler Loop lined up from 44 yards out and he missed. Wide right. It was unbelievable. The Ravens had desperately clawed back from a horrible start to the season and given everyone hope just for it to be stripped away at the last possible second against their most hated rival. Fans had their hearts ripped out for the 7th season in a row. John Harbaugh was fired after 18 years with the team, and the Steelers were off to the playoffs. To add insult to injury, the Steelers went on to deliver one of the worst statistical playoff performances in NFL history, getting blown out by the Texans 30-6. And Steelers coach Mike Tomlin stepped down just a day later. I think this is the perfect entry to close out the A tier. Okay, next up, we're going all the way back to 2008. 2008 was a year of huge changes for the Ravens as an organization, and not all of them were good. At first, it seemed like the team was completely falling apart and destined to fall into disarray, starting with the firing of head coach Brian Billick. Billick was only the 2nd coach in Ravens history, spending 9 seasons with the team and leading the Ravens to their first ever Super Bowl in 2000. Jonathan Ogden, the Ravens' first ever draft pick in 1996, retired. Ogden had made the Pro Bowl every single year of his entire career, became an NFL Hall of Famer, and is widely thought of as the best tackle in NFL history alongside Anthony Munoz. On top of that, Steve McNair, the Ravens' first ever superstar quarterback, decided to retire from the NFL at 34 years old after suffering a shoulder injury. Many organizations probably would have just crumbled after this, but the Ravens started their rebound by doing something pretty unthinkable. They hired John Harbaugh, an assistant coach and special teams coordinator under Andy Reid in the Philadelphia Eagles. Harbaugh had no head coaching experience at the college or NFL level and had never been an offensive or defensive coordinator before. Hires like this almost never happen in the NFL, but owner Steve Bisciotti and GM Ozzie Newsome were both impressed by him in his interviews and had no regrets about the hire. Turns out they did the right thing, as Harbaugh would go on to coach the Ravens for another 18 seasons. Then, in the draft, the Ravens took quarterback Joe Flacco with their first pick, would end up starting for the Ravens for 10 years and is still playing in the league to this day. Side note, he actually just made his first Pro Bowl at 41 years old. He definitely would have made it sooner if he didn't play in the same conference as some of the best quarterbacks of all time during his entire prime, but this is still pretty awesome. With their second pick, they took running back Ray Rice, who would be a key piece of the Ravens until his less than graceful departure from the NFL in 2013. During the season, the combination of Joe Flacco, a three-man running back tandem, and All-Pro LaRon McClain, Willis McGahee, and Ray Rice, as well as veteran wide receiver Derrick Mason, came together to create an offense that was extremely solid. The defense on the other side of the ball was still playing at a high level as well, finishing as the number 2 best defense in the league thanks to Ed Reed and Ray Lewis. The Ravens finished the season 11-5, blew out the Dolphins in the wild card round of the playoffs, and upset the number 1 seed Titans in the divisional round. January 18th, 2009 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The Ravens headed to play the Steelers in a game where 28 past, present, and future Pro Bowlers on two teams that absolutely despised each other met in what went down as one of the most physical games in NFL history. If you want a more in-depth breakdown of this game, I'd actually recommend watching Brett Coleman's video that I'll link in the description below. It's a really, really good video. The game started with a Steelers field goal, followed by a Joe Flacco interception, his first of 3 in the game. The Steelers kicked another field goal, and 2 drives later, Ray Lewis forced a Steelers fumble that the Ravens weren't able to capitalize on. They ended up turning the ball back over on a failed 4th down conversion. The Steelers didn't waste any time, and a Big Ben to Santonio Holmes touchdown put the Steelers up 13-0. The Ravens did end up scoring a touchdown before the second quarter ended, but got lucky from a huge dropped Roethlisberger pass before the half that 100% would have been a touchdown. The third quarter was mostly uneventful, just some hard-hitting defensive football. The fourth quarter was where things would pick up. A huge pass interference call put the Ravens in perfect position for a Willis McGahee touchdown, putting the score at 16-14 in favor of the Steelers. They'd get the ball right back after a punt, and the Ravens began to drive before the killing blow hit. Joe Flacco threw an interception right into the hands of Troy Polamalu, who ran it all the way back the other way for a touchdown that would end up sending the Steelers to the Super Bowl. The Ravens would get 2 more possessions, but turned the ball over both times. This game was pretty devastating, and the Polamalu pick six will live on in infamy as one of the worst moments in Ravens history. Some Ravens fans might even say this is the worst loss in franchise history, but honestly, I'd very much disagree. Yes, a Super Bowl was on the line, but at the end of the day, this was the most overachieving team in Ravens history. A first-time head coach, a rookie quarterback, and a team shaken up after losing some of their greatest players and their Super Bowl winning head coach made it to the AFC Championship game and put up a fight against one of the best teams in the league that went on to win the Super Bowl. The Ravens were only projected to win 6 games in 2008 and ended up winning 11 in the regular season and 2 in the playoffs. It was a tough loss, but definitely seemed to point to a bright future and possibly a Lombardi trophy in Baltimore, which is why I ranked this lower than a few other entries. If the pick by Polamalu hadn't happened, Joe Flacco very well could have been the first rookie quarterback to ever start in a Super Bowl. But as Mike Tomlin would say,
you know how it is, if my aunt had male parts, she'd be my uncle.
With that being said, I feel very good about starting off our S tier with this one. Let's get back to today's Ravens. In the 2024 offseason, the Baltimore Ravens made one of the most important decisions in franchise history. They signed future Hall of Fame running back Derrick Henry to a 2-year, $16 million deal. Henry, as of 2026, sits at number 10 all-time in rushing yards and number 4 all-time in rushing touchdowns, even though he's only been in a starting role for 6 seasons with the Tennessee Titans and 2 with the Baltimore Ravens. Despite this, the signing was kind of met with mixed reactions. Some people said that Henry was old and washed, as he had just turned 30 years old, and 30 is typically the age where running backs fall off in physical ability. Others said this was the missing piece Lamar Jackson and the Ravens needed to unlock their full potential. But what people said didn't really matter. A monster was about to be unleashed on the NFL. The 2024 Baltimore Ravens offense was so good, it was mind-blowing. They finished with the 3rd most yards of any team in a season of all time, more than the Greatest Show on Turf Rams in 2000 and just below the historic 2013 Broncos, the season where Peyton Manning broke just about every quarterback record ever. Derrick Henry finished the year with 1,921 yards, becoming the only player to break the 1,900-yard mark twice in their career, and led all running backs in rushing touchdowns and yards per carry. You'd think Derrick Henry completely carried the team from that information alone, but Lamar Jackson just truly took his game to another level. He was unreal in 2024.
And he bobbles it, scoops it in, vacuums it home. Here comes Hubbard. Oh, he threw him away like a rag doll. And he throws in the end zone. Caught for a touchdown. Caught for a touchdown by Likely.
Jackson posted almost 5,100 total yards and 45 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions, the fewest for a quarterback to throw more than 40 touchdowns ever, and had the 3rd best passer rating of any quarterback in a season in NFL history. During a blowout win over the Texans on Christmas, Jackson broke Michael Vick's record for all-time quarterback rushing yards and the Ravens franchise record for passing touchdowns in a season. Jackson also became the only player to ever lead the NFL in both yards per pass and yards per rush in a season. All that to say, the 2024 Ravens were extremely good, and heading into the playoffs, they lived up to all the hype. They gashed the Steelers for 300 rushing yards in a win where they were up 21-0 at halftime in the wild card round. Then, next week, came the game everyone had been waiting for, Ravens versus Bills in Buffalo. The Ravens entered the game missing Pro Bowl wide receiver Zay Flowers, but hopes were high regardless. Many people were positive whoever won this game would go on to the Super Bowl. The game started out with back-to-back touchdown drives, the first coming after the Ravens drove downfield and capped it off with the Lamar to Rashad Bateman touchdown, then the second a Bills score by Ray Davis. However, shortly after, the Ravens' woes would begin. On a miscommunicated play where Rashad Bateman later admitted he ran the wrong route, Lamar threw it deep, expecting Bateman to be there. He was not, and the ball was picked. The Ravens ended up getting the ball back, but shortly after a botched snap, Lamar then fumbled the icy ball while trying to avoid a sack. It seemed as though the Ravens' way had kicked in, and looked like the game would be a complete blowout when Buffalo scored 2 more touchdowns and went into the half up 21-10. However, in the second half, Lamar kicked it into another gear. He led the team down the field for a field goal, followed by a touchdown, and then a failed 2-point conversion on a blown-up play call. Buffalo looked sloppy in the second half, and after a Tyler Bass field goal, the Ravens seemed poised to score again. Then, disaster. Mark Andrews fumbled a first down pass while trying to avoid a defender and gave the ball right back to Buffalo. The defense held Josh Allen and the Bills to just a field goal, but the Ravens got more bad news. Receiver Rashad Bateman was out for the remainder of the game, meaning the Ravens were missing both of their top 2 receivers. Lamar Jackson didn't care though. For years, people claimed Lamar couldn't be clutch when it mattered, and he was ready to deliver a legacy drive to end those conversations for good. 3 minutes on the clock, 88 yards to go, it seemed near impossible. Lamar then drove the Ravens downfield all the way to the Bills' 24-yard line before it happened. An incredible touchdown pass to Isaiah Likely. This was it. This was Lamar's absolute legacy moment. All the Ravens needed to do was complete a 2-point conversion, and it seemed the game was going to overtime. Lamar Jackson runs right in the pocket with the game on the line and throws a gentle pass to an open Mark Andrews. It hits him right in the stomach. Both his hands touch it, and he dropped it. He dropped the ball in the most Ravens-like, completely improbable, completely heartbreaking fashion. The game was over, just like that.
I'm gonna kill myself! Wow. I'm going to kill myself, and it's your fault!
The Ravens couldn't just lose. They had to keep it close and give everyone hope just to tear it away again, because that is what the Ravens do. Buffalo went on to lose in the AFC Championship game, stamping the Chiefs a ticket to their 3rd straight Super Bowl. If you couldn't tell, I'm still not over this one, and it's hard to believe it's only number 4 on this list. Listen, you know the drill already. This one is going straight into the S tier. The Ravens and Patriots met 4 times in the playoffs, 2 of which were in the AFC Championship back-to-back in the 2011 and 2012 seasons. Today we'll be talking about the first of those 2 AFC Championship games that will forever go down as quite possibly the single most infamous game in Ravens history. How can that be the case and it's not number 1 on the list? I'll explain in a minute. In 2011, it seemed like an era of Baltimore football was truly coming to an end. Ray Lewis, the Ravens' star linebacker who racked up more Pro Bowls than any other defender in the Super Bowl era, was already 35 years old. Most high-level linebackers are retired around 30, so a bunch of rumors were floating around heading into the playoffs that these would be Lewis's final games. Hall of Fame safety Ed Reed was also around 32 years old at the time, extremely old for a free safety, and had the same rumors surrounding him. Reed and Lewis had directed the most consistently dominant defense of the 2000s, and many assumed as soon as they retired, the Ravens would fall apart. So, needless to say, the team's hunt for a Super Bowl ring was becoming much more urgent. On the flip side, though, the Ravens had the 3rd best defense in the league in 2011 by points allowed, and 2nd in sacks, thanks to a monster Defensive Player of the Year season from Terrell Suggs, which meant whatever happened with Reed and Lewis, Suggs would stay and be the backbone of the team. The team had also traded for Pro Bowl receiver Anquan Boldin in the offseason, who would become a key weapon in the future. January 22nd, 2012, the Ravens entered Gillette Stadium as 7-point underdogs against a team in the midst of the most dominant stretch in football history. Winner goes to the Super Bowl, loser heads home, you know the deal. The odds looked promising for whoever won, as they'd go on to face a relatively weak Giants team in the big game. The game started out as a defensive slugfest, with only 3 points being scored in the first quarter, capped off by a Tom Brady interception. The second quarter picked up the pace a bit, as each team scored matching touchdowns on top of a field goal apiece, sending the game into the half at 13-10. After halftime, another New England field goal was met by a Torrey Smith touchdown, followed by a fumbled Patriots punt, allowing the Ravens to kick a second field goal, putting them up 20-16. However, the lead was short-lived, as Tom Brady would drive once more down the field and jump into the end zone for a touchdown on 4th and goal. Flacco had a chance to strike back, but threw a pretty nasty interception. It didn't matter in the end though, because Jimmy Smith beautifully picked off a Brady deep ball, allowing the Ravens to try again. The Ravens then turned the ball over on downs in New England territory with time growing short. The Ravens defense made a stand and forced a punt from the Pats. 1 minute and 40 seconds left in the game. Super Bowl on the line. The Ravens methodically made their way down to New England's 14-yard line with just 20 seconds left. And then it happened. Flacco threw a pass into the hands of Lee Evans to send them to a Super Bowl, but Lee Evans dropped the ball.
31 seconds left in the AFC Championship. Flacco fires end zone. Caught! Oh! Lee Evans, no! They really need to hold on to the ball. He dropped it. He dropped it.
It was heartbreaking, but the Ravens still had time to try a field goal to send the game to overtime. Billy Cundiff lined up to try a 32-yard chip shot field goal that almost any kicker could make. But what followed was probably the most infamous play in Ravens history. Wide left. He missed. The fans and players were completely devastated.
I wish I could share with you the words that could even begin to convey the disbelief and the disappointment on the Ravens players as they make the long jog to their locker room.
If Evans had caught that ball or Cundiff made that field goal, they'd have a shot at a Super Bowl trophy. Instead, they were sent home completely heartbroken, wondering what could have been. This was the type of loss that completely breaks NFL teams and sends them on a downward spiral. You might be asking, how is this not number one? Well, because the downward spiral didn't happen. In the locker room after the game came quite possibly the most important moment in the history of the Ravens franchise. I'll make another very in-depth video about what happened, but needless to say, the Ravens made up for falling short in 2011 by winning the Super Bowl the following year, making this game much less painful to look back on in the present. This championship game almost feels like it was the driving force that motivated the Ravens to win another Super Bowl, and I don't think it's crazy to say that. With that being said, I do still think this game belongs in the S tier because of how rough it was in the moment. 2019 was a pretty surreal year for the Ravens. Prior to the season, the Ravens made headlines by trading away the team's quarterback of 11 years, Joe Flacco, to the Denver Broncos for a 4th-round pick. The team had drafted a young quarterback named Lamar Jackson the year prior and wanted Flacco to mentor him. Flacco refused though, not wanting to risk giving up his starting role to Lamar, and the rest is history. Flacco was gone, and the young project quarterback Jackson was in. Jackson showed a lot of promise in the few games he played in his first year, but literally no one could have predicted what was coming. The Ravens headed into the year with a weak receiving corps starring players like Willie Snead and Marquise Brown, as well as an uninspiring 30-year-old running back in Mark Ingram. Nothing much was expected from this team as they were projected to win 8 games during the season, the same win total as an abysmal Carolina Panthers team that ended up going 5-11. Needless to say, expectations were not high. What happened next made history. The Ravens started Jackson's first season as a starter going to Miami to face the Dolphins and proceeded to win by a margin of 49 points. Lamar Jackson became the youngest player to ever have a perfect passer rating in a game, throwing 5 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Lamar Jackson won the AFC Offensive Player of the Week award, and people wondered if this game was just a fluke or if the Ravens were legit. Well, after starting the season 2-2, the Ravens went on a 12-game win streak, ending the year 14-2, the best record in franchise history. The Ravens put up the most rushing yards of any team ever, and Lamar Jackson broke Mike Vick's record for most quarterback rushing yards in a season at 1,200. Lamar Jackson was the first quarterback to ever rush for 1,000 yards in general and accounted for 4,200 total yards and 43 touchdowns. Jackson followed in the footsteps of Tom Brady, becoming just the second ever unanimous NFL MVP and fell just 2 votes short of taking home the Offensive Player of the Year award as well, to a record-breaking Michael Thomas season. The Ravens went to the playoffs as the 1 seed, getting a bye week and then hosting the 9-7 Tennessee Titans and Derrick Henry in Baltimore. People were so sure the Ravens would win this game that media personalities were saying things like, "Whoever Baltimore faces in the Super Bowl is in trouble," before they even played a single playoff game. Spoiler alert, in this game, Lamar Jackson recorded over 500 total yards, and the Ravens won the time of possession battle, while Titans quarterback Ryan Tannehill only completed 7 passes for 89 yards. If I told you those stats alone, you'd surely think the Ravens won, right? Well, the game started out on a pretty rough note with Lamar Jackson throwing a ball to Mark Andrews on his second throw of the game that bounced off of his fingers and into the hands of Chicago Bears legend Kevin Byard. Derrick Henry then drove the Titans into scoring range where a Jonnu Smith touchdown put them up by 7. Baltimore's offense was electric though, so people weren't worried about them making a comeback. However, the Ravens then failed to convert a 4th down in their own territory, and 1 play later, Ryan Tannehill threw a 45-yard touchdown to put the Titans up by 14. This is when I remember starting to worry. The Ravens did end up scoring 2 field goals before the half, cutting the lead down to 8 points. Jackson and the Ravens were only down 1 score and had time to regroup, so the game was still perfectly in reach with the Ravens getting the ball back after halftime. They then proceeded to go down the field only to fail to convert another 4th and 1. Derrick Henry then single-handedly took the Titans inside the 5-yard line off the back of a 66-yard run, And then the humiliation began. Derrick Henry threw a touchdown to Corey Davis, bringing the lead to 21-6. Henry had thrown a touchdown in this game before Lamar had, and it was the third quarter. The Ravens got the ball back and proceeded to fumble it back to the Titans on the first play of the drive, which resulted in another Titans touchdown, 28-6. I remember watching this game live, and by this point, my head was just in my hands, and unfortunately, it would only get worse. The next drive was capped off by another Lamar interception, because why wouldn't it be? The Ravens did end up scoring a touchdown in the fourth quarter, but it didn't really matter. The 2-point conversion failed, and the Ravens turned the ball over on downs on both of their final 2 drives of the game, with the final score being 28-12. The team was completely and utterly dominated and humiliated in the biggest game of Lamar Jackson's young career, in a game where Derrick Henry recorded over 200 yards. Hope was not completely lost, since Lamar Jackson was only 23 years old and had won MVP in his first year as a starter, so there was at least one thing to look forward to in the future. That did not change how hard this loss was when it happened, though. I remember my dad pretty much locked himself in his room for multiple days straight to wallow in his misery with the lights off, and I found myself rallying for head coach John Harbaugh and offensive coordinator Greg Roman to be fired online. It was upsetting to go one and done in the best season in franchise history at the time, especially given how humiliating the loss was. And this game ended up starting the exhausting but not completely unfounded narrative that Lamar Jackson and the Ravens couldn't perform in the playoffs. I think it's only fitting that this one caps off the S tier. And finally, we make it to the absolute top of the list. Most of the incidents on this list make me feel next to nothing anymore because I've been desensitized by the amount of memes or clips I've seen of them, but this one is different. I am genuinely positive that I will still be thinking about this game in horror on my deathbed if Lamar Jackson never wins a Super Bowl, and I'll tell you why. The Ravens had a down year in 2022 with Lamar Jackson suffering from an injury in a season that was capped off by a playoff loss to the division rival Bengals that I covered earlier. But the Ravens made some key acquisitions leading up to 2023. The team was fresh off of trading for all-pro linebacker Roquan Smith and signed edge rushers Jadeveon Clowney and Kyle Van Noy, receiver Odell Beckham Jr., and undrafted free agent running back Keaton Mitchell. The team also drafted wide receiver Zay Flowers, hoping they'd finally found their future wide receiver 1 after OBJ, which he never really turned out to be the wide receiver 1, but that was the plan originally, and replaced offensive coordinator Greg Roman with Georgia's Todd Monken. With all these new players on top of the change of coordinator, many people thought Lamar would be able to get back on track to his previous levels of production despite coming back from injury. The season started out rough in the injury department, as by week 4, the Ravens had lost 20 players to injury. Despite that, they started out 3-1 and just took off from there. The Ravens defense, led by coordinator Mike Macdonald, linebacker Roquan Smith, safety Kyle Hamilton, and defensive tackle Nnamdi Madubuike, became not just great, but all-time great. By week 9, the defense had been given the nickname Death Row in a reference to Roquan Smith's name and jersey number, and had allowed a touchdown on just 8.6% of drives. That was the lowest touchdown percentage since the 2000 Ravens defense, regarded as quite possibly the best defense in NFL history. This defense was absolutely terrifying, and Super Bowl talks had already begun. The craziest part was that the Ravens were also one of the league's best offenses, leading the NFL in offensive DVOA. Since the Ravens lost all 3 of their top running backs throughout various points in the season, Lamar Jackson had to step up and become their entire running game, and he did. Jackson led the team in rushing yards, putting 4,500 total yards up and 30 touchdowns on a team with no reliable running back options and a rookie as their primary receiver. Jackson's efforts were definitely noticed by the league, and MVP conversations started to heat up. The debates over the MVP award got much more serious towards the end of the season, with many unable to decide whether Lamar Jackson or 49ers quarterback Brock Purdy should take home the award. Thankfully for voters, the 2 quarterbacks met in week 16. The Niners and Ravens matchup was viewed as a potential Super Bowl preview, and hype grew like crazy as the teams were the number 1 and number 2 defenses in the league, both had top offenses, and both had an 11-3 record. On Christmas, though, the Ravens silenced everyone when they went to Santa Clara and beat the Niners in a game that was already over halfway through the third quarter. Purdy threw 4 interceptions, and Jackson locked up the MVP award. The Ravens finished the year in Miami with a 56-19 decimation of the Dolphins, where Lamar threw 5 touchdowns, and the Ravens defense locked up the NFL's most explosive offense. The Ravens secured the #1 seed and home field advantage in the playoffs for the second time in Jackson's career. The Ravens were incredible in the regular season, but critics said Lamar could never get it done in the playoffs. His response was a 34-10 blowout of the Houston Texans in the divisional round, where Lamar became the first player to ever throw and rush for multiple touchdowns in a playoff game. Momentum had never been so high for the Ravens as they prepared to host the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game in Baltimore. The Chiefs had been wildly disappointing, falling from the #1 offense in 2022 to number 15 in 2023, and somehow squirmed their way into the AFC Championship game. The odds seemed promising. This was it. Lamar Jackson and the Ravens just needed one win, and they would finally get over the hump and make the Super Bowl. January 8th, 2024 was the darkest day in Baltimore Ravens history, and the single worst day of my lifetime as an NFL fan. I don't even think it's particularly close. As I mentioned earlier, I was living in Kansas City when this game happened and was attending a watch party. I was once again the only Ravens fan there, wearing my Zay Flowers jersey, mind you, surrounded by a sea of Chiefs fans. Keep that context in mind while I describe this game to you, because this was probably the worst situation I could have humanly been in as a Ravens fan, watching this absolute disgrace of a game happen. The game opened up with a 3-and-out for the Ravens, followed by a Mahomes to Kelsey Chiefs touchdown, which was not a great start, but it was quickly made up for by a pretty incredible Lamar Jackson to Zay Flowers touchdown pass on the next drive. Things went downhill pretty quickly though, as the Chiefs then possessed the ball for damn near 10 straight minutes and scored one more time. And then the Ravens got the ball back and immediately turned it back over to the Chiefs. Wow. Okay. At least the Chiefs didn't score off the turnover since they failed to convert a 4th down, so at least Baltimore could try again, but nope, nothing. I mean, Lamar Jackson caught his own pass, which was pretty fucking awesome for all it's worth. This play absolutely would have gone for an all-time legendary touchdown if Jackson got just one extra step on Drew Tranquill. The only points for the rest of the half were a Chiefs field goal, and the game went into the half at 17-7 in favor of the Chiefs. The Chiefs received the ball to open the second half, followed by a sequence of 5 straight punts. Neither team could do anything until the end of the third quarter, when the jolt finally came to the Ravens. Lamar threw a 54-yard deep ball to Flowers, who took it down to the 9-yard line. It looked like this would finally be a game again. Unfortunately, Zay was called for a 15-yard taunting penalty, which, while it was pretty soft, but not necessarily a wrong call, and Zay should have been more professional, Travis Kelce had also been taunting Ravens players for the entire game and didn't get called once. Doesn't matter though, nothing can change what happened. All the Ravens had to do was score, and it seemed the moment had come. Lamar hit Flowers again, and he turned towards the end zone, dove, and for a moment, the Super Bowl was so close. I and every other Ravens fan on the planet could almost taste it. Then they showed the replay.
No. Wait.
Where L'Jarius Sneed punched the ball out of Zay Flowers' hands at the 1-yard line. 1 yard. 1 yard from a touchdown. 1 yard from getting every bit of momentum the game had left. The ball landed in the end zone and in the hands of Trent McDuffie, and it was Chiefs ball again. I knew in my heart at that moment that this Ravens team wouldn't be going to the Super Bowl, whether I wanted to admit it or not. This game wasn't over just yet though, and the Ravens did get a burst of energy from a big play by Nelson Agholor. Didn't matter though. This game needed to be as agonizing as possible, so immediately after, Isaiah likely signaled to Lamar that he was open. Lamar threw it, and it was picked off in triple coverage. That was the game killer right there. it couldn't possibly get worse, right? Wrong. Always wrong. It can always get worse with the Ravens. On the Ravens' final drive of the game, they once again got into scoring position, and Lamar prepared to throw the ball to Isaiah Likely while the pocket shrunk around him. Chiefs safety Chamari Connor then threw Likely to the ground in one of the more obvious penalties you could see, and Lamar was forced to throw the ball away. Lamar, Likely, and the crowd seemingly thought the flag was coming out, but it never did. Tony Romo even said on the broadcast,
A little bit of foot slippage, but that should have been called.
and that was it. The Ravens kicked a field goal and never got the ball back. The game ended 17-10, and the Chiefs were heading to what would end up being their 4th of 5 Super Bowl appearances in a span of 6 years. I just honestly and truly could not believe it. I couldn't believe how humiliating this game was, how unprepared the team looked, how thoroughly outcoached the Ravens were. The Chiefs were held to 0 points in the entire second half, and the Ravens still lost. The Chiefs fans around me at the watch party were screaming and dancing in celebration while I sat with my head in my hands and tears in my eyes. My Chiefs fan friend sitting next to me yelled, "We're going back to the Super Bowl again!" To which I replied, "It's just another Super Bowl to you. To me, it would have been everything." I was probably being a bit of a sore loser in the moment, but that same friend later admitted to me that she had started to become desensitized to going to the Super Bowl because of how much the Chiefs had made it, so it wasn't entirely unfounded. But back to the actual game. The Chiefs dominated the time of possession battle by 16 entire minutes and didn't turn the ball over once. Meanwhile, the Ravens turned the ball over 3 times in key moments, couldn't stay on the field, committed 95 yards worth of penalties, and just didn't look prepared for the moment. Make no mistake, this was a game of borderline coaching malpractice. The Ravens' play calling was just awful on offense. Offensive coordinator Todd Monken and John Harbaugh decided to only give the ball to their running backs 6 times in this entire game. No joke. I couldn't believe it. This team was so unbelievably undisciplined, which resulted in all those penalties and ultimately just comes back as a reflection on the coaching staff. This was the moment where most Ravens fans who hadn't already turned on John Harbaugh, who had been the coach since 2008, began to call for him to be fired. I remember texting my friend after this game that we needed to promote defensive coordinator Mike Macdonald to head coach, but we didn't. Mike would go on to get hired by the Seattle Seahawks just 3 days after this game as their head coach, and just 2 years later is now coaching in the Super Bowl with the best defense in the NFL. Editor's note, since I finished writing the script for this video, he actually won the Super Bowl, so do with that information what you will. More consequences came from this game though. The Ravens culture had been fully transformed into a culture of choking, abandoning the run game, and consistently falling short when it mattered most. This is what a once feared and respected organization had been reduced to, a reputation of regular season success followed by failure to perform in the playoffs. However, in January of 2025, several heartbreaks and a couple years after this game, Coach John Harbaugh was fired after 18 years with the Ravens.
Bye, bitch!
Harbaugh is now the head coach of the New York Giants. Coordinator Todd Monken, who once again abandoned the run game when it mattered in 2024 and 2025, is also gone and is now the coach of the Cleveland Browns. The Ravens brought in Chargers defensive coordinator Jesse Minter, and Sean Payton and Ben Johnson disciple Declan Doyle to replace those two as their head coach and offensive coordinator. All Ravens fans can hope for now, after everything that's happened in the last 6 years, all the failure and the heartbreak, this new coaching staff can finally bring the change that the Ravens have long needed in 2026. And now it's time for our final tier list edition. We're obviously putting this one in the one and only S+ tier. Thank you so much for watching. This is my first video on this channel, and it's a long one, I know. I'd love to release more interesting football content in the future. This video took forever to make, over a month of writing and research alone, and about 1 trillion hours of editing. So if you want to see more, please drop a like and subscribe. It would really help me out. I've had another couple video ideas cooking up, and one video I've been doing research off and on for the last like 6 months. If you guys enjoyed this one, I'll definitely try to get those other videos out faster. Thanks for watching, and peace.